Hello and welcome to the 9th edition of the GreenWave podcast by Synergy International. I'm SYNI, your host, and today we have a fascinating topic: France's energy at a crossroads. Over the next half hour or so, we'll explore how France became a global force in nuclear energy, the political and environmental forces behind that development, and how the country's aspirations are evolving in an era increasingly focused on sustainable energy, particularly the rise of green hydrogen. This story of France's energy policy is more than just an account of reactors and renewables. It's also a tale of politics, history, national identity, and the world's journey toward a new, carbon-neutral reality. For some background, France boasts the largest electricity exports in Europe, close to 89 terawatt-hours, nearly triple that of Sweden, the next biggest exporter. That fact alone reveals how vital French power production is not only to its own citizens, but to many neighbouring countries. A huge part of this success rests on its nuclear fleet. Over 70% of France's electricity generation comes from nuclear, giving it exceptionally low carbon emissions, an average of just 56 grams of CO2 per kilowatt-hour, according to data compiled by Our World in Data. This nuclear-oriented system is admired by some for delivering consistent, low-emission power, but it also brings serious questions about waste management, infrastructure costs, and a potential over-reliance on this single source. On the other side of the spectrum, a new wave of sustainable energy solutions, including green hydrogen, has garnered momentum across Europe, promising an innovative path to carbon neutrality. So, what does the future hold for France? Will the nation's long-standing commitment to nuclear power continue, or will it pivot toward other sustainable energy alternatives, making use of its advantageous geography and industrial capacity? Let's begin by taking a step back into the history that gave rise to modern French nuclear policy, and then see how that foundation is shaping the country's current stance on renewables and hydrogen. The story of France's nuclear sector dates back to the mid-20th century. After World War II, France's industrial, economic, and political leaders saw an urgent need to establish energy independence and global influence. The country had weathered the ravages of war on its own soil, and like many European nations, it was looking for strong symbols of rebuilding and self-reliance. Although coal was prevalent, there was deep concern about supply security and pollution. And then there was the promise of nuclear technology, an almost utopian vision of abundant, low-cost electricity that could help France emerge as a technological powerhouse. The 1973 oil crisis acted as an even greater catalyst. When global oil prices soared overnight, the French government, led by President Georges Pompidou, and later continued under President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, decided that dependence on imported fossil fuels posed an existential threat to the economy. Nuclear energy offered an answer. It harnessed local resources. Uranium could be sourced from stable partners or extracted at home in modest quantities, and ensured a hedge against the price volatility of foreign oil. The Mesmer Plan, a massive nuclear build-out program launched in the early 1970s, encapsulated this ambition by laying down the framework for constructing dozens of reactors in record time. It was a technological moonshot of sorts, reflecting an extraordinary level of national will and engineering prowess. Over time, state-owned entities like Électricité de France, EDF, and Areva, now Orano, became global leaders in nuclear technology. French universities and research centres poured resources into advancing reactor design and improving safety standards. On top of that, nuclear became intertwined with national pride. The success of the nuclear programme showcased French ingenuity and independence. Yet, this unwavering commitment to nuclear energy did not come without criticisms. Concerns about nuclear waste, high construction costs, and the risks of catastrophic accidents have always simmered. Still, In the eyes of many French policymakers and citizens, nuclear power was worth the risk, especially if it meant guaranteeing France's energy autonomy and providing electricity at stable prices. From the outset, the nuclear program was not purely a technological or economic matter. French political leaders viewed nuclear as a strategic resource, both for military and civilian ends. Possessing nuclear weapons capabilities remained a symbol of sovereignty, and a robust civilian nuclear industry provided the advanced scientific infrastructure and expertise to keep that defense program strong. Thus, a comprehensive nuclear ecosystem, researchers, industrial suppliers, engineers, developed under direct government backing. During the mid-20th century, France's political environment was also shaped by powerful state-centric traditions. Economic life in many sectors, especially energy, was guided by a centralized approach. Most of the major decisions, like building reactors or deploying new energy policies, were made at the highest levels of government. This top-down framework allowed officials to move quickly, bypassing some local opposition or tedious bureaucratic hurdles. In democratic terms, it did cause tension at times, as regional and environmental activists pushed back against the near-monolithic nuclear agenda. Still, the alignment between industrial strategy, national security interests, and scientific ambition kept nuclear power at the core of France's energy identity. By the 1980s and 1990s, the French public saw nuclear as a stable pillar of the economy, guaranteeing cheaper electricity bills compared to neighbours reliant on imported fossil fuels. Even left-wing and right-wing governments found common ground in upholding nuclear leadership. Political controversies mostly revolved around how to manage nuclear waste and whether the government was transparent enough about incidents, but the fundamental commitment to nuclear power stayed unshaken until relatively recently. It's only in the past couple of decades that the global shift toward renewables and the climate crisis debate have stirred more intense introspection in French politics. The question, could nuclear and renewables coexist productively, or would France eventually pivot away from nuclear, as some European neighbours have done? One of the core arguments for nuclear power is its near-zero carbon footprint in electricity generation. Unlike coal or gas plants, reactors do not emit CO2 during operation. With over 70% of its electricity from nuclear, France's power grid is considered one of the cleanest among developed nations. This low-carbon profile has become even more relevant with climate change at the forefront of policy discussions. In effect, France has achieved a level of decarbonisation that many countries are still struggling to reach. Electric vehicles, electrified trains, and energy-intensive industries can all tap into a relatively clean energy source, significantly reducing national greenhouse gas emissions. However, zero carbon does not necessarily equate to zero environmental impact. Nuclear waste disposal remains an unresolved challenge. While the volume of high-level radioactive waste is small relative to waste from other energy industries, it demands secure long-term storage solutions that can remain safe for thousands of years. Accidents, although rare, can have severe repercussions on local communities and ecosystems. Detractors argue that the social and financial costs of nuclear accidents or waste disposal could overshadow the benefits of low-carbon electricity. At the same time, countries face the urgent necessity of slashing emissions to meet global climate goals. If nuclear can be managed securely, it offers a baseline of stable energy that complements intermittent renewables like wind and solar. Indeed, France's success with nuclear has established it as a benchmark for limiting emissions on a national scale while sustaining industrial production and economic growth. For climate-focused policymakers, the argument is straightforward. Nuclear is a dependable anchor in the transition period. Yet, as more powerful, efficient renewable technology emerges, the justification for continuous nuclear expansion and the associated financial burden may become less convincing. The future likely involves a balance, leveraging nuclear to maintain a stable grid while aggressively scaling up wind, solar, and emerging solutions like green hydrogen. And no one can ignore the growing acceptance of micronuclear projects that are tailored to supply the needs of specific data center projects for the likes of tech giants Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple. Over the last few years, hydrogen, especially green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity, has emerged as a critical piece of Europe's decarbonisation plan. Hydrogen is a versatile energy carrier. It can store excess wind and solar power, fuel vehicles, heat buildings, and serve as a feedstock for industrial processes like steel and chemicals. Most importantly, when green hydrogen is burned, its only direct emission is water vapour, making it a zero-carbon alternative to fossil fuels if the hydrogen itself is generated from renewables. Where does France stand in this hydrogen revolution? Geographically, the country is in a remarkably strategic position. It sits between Spain, a leader in renewable energy and one of Europe's best places for solar-based hydrogen production, as any listeners to our episode 6 will know, and major industrial consumers in Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. France could potentially become a transit corridor, channeling hydrogen produced in the Iberian Peninsula and even North Africa to Central Europe. Yet, questions remain over whether French policymakers are comfortable adopting that transit country role. Historically, France has seen itself more as an energy exporter than a transit hub. Shifting that self-image might require new regulations, infrastructure, and partnerships, and not everyone in France is on board. If we zoom in on domestic resources, France also has ample solar potential, especially in the southern regions, and it already has wind farms across its territory and coastline. If the grid and infrastructure can scale appropriately, something that requires major investment, France could produce large volumes of green hydrogen directly on its own soil. This combo of nuclear baseload, which ensures the lights never go out, combined with an expanding renewable sector, might allow France to generate a steady surplus of zero-carbon power that can be diverted into electrolysis for hydrogen production. Another factor is France's robust industrial base. Automotive manufacturers, chemical industries, oil and gas giants, and specialized technology firms are all hunting for new markets in a carbon-neutral future. Hydrogen propulsion for cars, buses, and even trains has advanced from theory to pilot projects in Europe. In Paris, for example, a small fleet of hydrogen taxis is already operational, giving a glimpse into hydrogen's potential to decarbonize urban mobility. As these demonstrations grow, the public and private sectors are investigating how large-scale hydrogen adoption might create jobs, reduce carbon emissions, and keep France at the forefront of green technology innovation. Yet, building a fully fledged hydrogen economy is no small task. It requires new pipelines, upgraded storage facilities, fueling stations, electrolyzers, and alliances that stretch beyond France's borders. Projects like the Barmar subsea pipeline, connecting Barcelona to Marseille, represent a tangible step toward an interconnected hydrogen network. But questions about cost, political will, and international cooperation loom large. The European hydrogen backbone, a proposed infrastructure linking multiple countries, would also pass through France. Realizing this vision would strengthen the single energy market in Europe and open major opportunities for French companies. However, the timeline, exact route, and who foots the bill are far from settled. Finally, in the domain of research and development, French universities and research centres have extensive histories of pioneering energy technologies, nuclear obviously, but also advanced chemistry and materials science. That foundation can pivot into hydrogen-focused breakthroughs, improved electrolyzer efficiency, better hydrogen storage materials, and safer distribution methods. As competition for hydrogen leadership heats up, especially from Germany and other parts of Europe, France is well positioned to leverage its scientific prowess and industrial might. Still, the success of these initiatives will hinge on cohesive government policies, robust investment, and social acceptance of large-scale hydrogen infrastructure. Nuclear and green hydrogen are both low carbon, but they fulfill different roles within the energy system. Nuclear excels at delivering stable baseload power with minimal CO2 emissions. Green hydrogen, on the other hand, can store and transport energy, support mobility, and serve as a carbon-free feedstock for industries that are otherwise hard to decarbonize. In policy debates, some see green hydrogen as an extension of nuclear. If France continues to generate abundant nuclear power, any electricity not needed for the immediate grid could be diverted into electrolyzers to create hydrogen. This nuclear-hydrogen synergy is one scenario that could keep French reactors running at high capacity while accelerating hydrogen production. Others argue that the future lies in maximizing renewable sources, wind, solar, hydro, so that all of France's hydrogen is truly green, with no downstream nuclear footprint. It's a lively discussion because some environmental groups consider nuclear less desirable than truly renewable options, while proponents of nuclear see it as a tried-and-true technology that remains an integral part of the transition. Politically, the debate can be seen in the corridors of power, where one faction remains strongly pro-nuclear, citing its reliability and the huge existing investment, while another increasingly advocates for a more diverse clean energy mix, with a special emphasis on green hydrogen. Observers watch to see how this internal dynamic within the French administration unfolds under national decarbonisation targets and broader European Union regulations. In recent years, there has been renewed discussion in France about extending the life of existing reactors and constructing new generation units. Some policymakers see nuclear as indispensable to meeting climate goals quickly, especially as Europe experiences energy supply uncertainties and price swings. At the same time, the French government has also drafted significant plans for hydrogen development, reflecting growing awareness that being a major electricity exporter does not automatically translate into leadership in green hydrogen. This push for hydrogen is layered atop a broader European context, in which the EU aims to produce and import large quantities of renewable hydrogen for industry and transport. Green-minded politicians and segments of the public champion investments in solar arrays, wind farms, and hydrogen infrastructure. Regional governments, especially in the south, see solar and wind as major opportunities for job creation. Others caution that, without nuclear, France risks losing its best tool for keeping emissions low right now. As debates escalate, one point stands out. Nuclear and hydrogen need not be mutually exclusive. Indeed, many, including us at SYNI International, are calling for a dual approach, in which nuclear ensures a strong baseload, while green hydrogen expands in tandem to decarbonise sectors that can't easily be electrified. International relations play a role too. France's potential to receive hydrogen from Morocco or export it to Germany underscores a new facet of energy diplomacy. No longer is it just about power lines spanning borders. Now, pipeline routes for hydrogen are up for discussion, with infrastructure projects like Barmar grabbing headlines. Does France want to facilitate these flows, or lead its own hydrogen production, or both? The answer is evolving. In either case, France's geographic location and robust industrial ecosystem give it strong leverage in charting Europe's low-carbon future. Amid all this, it's worth recalling some of the historical curiosities that show France's close relationship with hydrogen. The name hydrogen itself was coined by the French chemist Antoine Lavoisier, from Greek words meaning water former. And back in 1783, Jacques Charles launched the first hydrogen balloon flight from the Champ de Mars, a stone's throw from where the Eiffel Tower now stands. That crowd included none other than Benjamin Franklin, who was in Paris during that period. So, in a sense, the innovative spirit around hydrogen has long had French roots, even if the large-scale push for hydrogen as an energy carrier is a more modern development. Looking toward the future, the SYNI International team sees a few key themes converging. First is infrastructure and investment needs. Nuclear plants require maintenance and, in some cases, replacement with next-generation reactors. Simultaneously, hydrogen production facilities and pipelines need to be built or retrofitted. These parallel paths demand huge capital outlays and political commitment. Second is research and development. French universities and labs can capitalize on deep scientific expertise to lead in hydrogen technologies, just as they did in nuclear. Coupled with world-class industrial players, the R&D environment is poised for breakthroughs if the government and private sector continue funding such initiatives. Third is global and European dynamics. Energy policy never exists in a vacuum. EU regulations, energy crises, and geopolitical changes can abruptly shift priorities. France's decisions about nuclear and hydrogen will be influenced by what happens in neighbouring countries, which might demand or supply hydrogen, as well as by global climate negotiations. Finally, there is a need to address public opinion and environmental concerns. Nuclear enjoys a degree of acceptance in France that is unusual compared to some other European nations, but the rise of green parties and the global narrative around renewable energy could gradually change that sentiment. And as more success stories emerge for green hydrogen, like widespread adoption in transportation, public opinion may tilt even more toward new forms of sustainable energy. Today, France finds itself at a pivotal crossroads for its energy future. Decades of nuclear expertise have yielded one of the lowest carbon electricity systems in the world, making the French power grid a model of reliability and stability. At the same time, the climate urgency and the promise of green hydrogen offer up fresh opportunities, ones that could redefine France's role in Europe's energy landscape. Balancing these two tracks calls for nuanced policy decisions. Rather than depicting it as nuclear versus hydrogen, we argue that both can be part of a cohesive strategy. Nuclear plants meet baseload demands and keep emissions low, while green hydrogen can address areas of the economy that are difficult to electrify and serve as a buffer for storing renewable energy. Politically, the challenge lies in ensuring that the country doesn't allow the strength of its nuclear sector to overshadow the emerging possibilities of renewables. Adapting to a rapidly evolving energy scene will require continued public debate, industrial collaboration, and cross-border diplomacy. The transition won't be immediate. But looking back at how swiftly France embraced nuclear power in the 1970s, it's not hard to imagine that with the right commitment, France could become a leading player in green hydrogen, just as it did with nuclear. Well, that's our deep dive into France's energy crossroads. From the unprecedented scale-up of nuclear that began decades ago, to the nascent, but fast-growing, green hydrogen revolution, France provides a unique case study of how a country shapes its energy destiny amid shifting technological and political landscapes. There's no single path forward that will satisfy everyone. Debates about cost, safety, sustainability, and national pride will continue. But what remains certain is that France's choices will have profound repercussions, not just for French citizens, but for the broader European energy market and the global climate fight. And that's a wrap on our 9th GreenWave podcast episode. Thanks for sharing your time again this week. The pod can be found wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, Podchaser, Boomplay, and Player FM. And if you missed any of our LinkedIn posts or GreenWave Gazette this week, don't worry. You can catch us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, or directly on our website, synergy-international.net. We'll continue to reflect on the major themes that guide sustainable finance and global policy. Until next time, keep riding the green wave of sustainability.